Homeowner accidentally finds a hidden room in his house, cannot believe what he has discovered in there. David was a middle-aged man looking for a place to start his new business. He was a lawyer who found the perfect space in Geneva, New York. It was an old structure, but for him, it has character. Cleaning up the place, he discovered something peculiar right around the corner top wall. He was feeling his way towards the wall, and he noticed that it was not a wall at all but a hidden door. David felt overwhelmingly curious about what was on the other side of the wall. Little did he know that what lays on the other side of the door will change his life. David and his friend enjoyed checking out the new building. They were satisfied with everything about it. The rooms are just perfect for their purpose. They have nothing much to do with the interior. They only have to change some little things. One of those is the light bulb on the third floor. Little did they know that there's more to it than that. When David climbed up, he noticed that it wasn't just the bulb that needs to be changed. The ceiling also needed renovation. But then, as he looked at the ceiling longer, he realized that there's something quite odd about it. It's not just because it's worn out. Further on, he took out his flashlight, and that's when he got a better view. As the light from the phone shone a certain part of the ceiling, David found an access panel. Not really seeing it at first glance, he and his friend could not believe their eyes. They're also curious as to what's inside. As there was no one to stop them and they want to know what's there, they decided to check it out. With the help of his friend, David stacked some chairs so that he can climb up and see what's inside. As he only has his phone's tiny flashlight to illuminate the place, he couldn't identify anything at first. It didn't also help that the room was dusty. But then, as his eyes adjusted to that dim space, he realized that he has found something gorgeous. David lowered himself down shortly after checking what's in the attic. He was in shock, and words seemed to struggle on the tip of his tongue. His friend, who was also curious, was waiting for him to say something. Anti-Option building. Well, the first thing that came out of David's mouth was only 3 words, "Oh my God." He told his companion that he think they just found the Goonies treasure. Once he was able to catch his breath, David told his friend what he saw. He exclaimed that inside the attic were picture frames that were stacked together. However, he also noted that those frames were not just ordinary ones. Some of them were trimmed in gold, and the woodwork was overly exquisite. He even emphasized how they are golden and gilded. According to David, the frames shone brightly when his phone's light landed on them. Not satisfied with what he described, his friend suggested that they should come back and check the attic together. David's words were not enough to quench his curiosity. They made a plan that they'd climb up there again on the next day. Without minding the dusty condition of the room, the two began their exploration the following day. They were amazed to find that there were stacks of old photographs, frames, and glass negatives in there. They were so intrigued that they stayed there for almost 12 hours. But guess what? Those golden turn-of-the-century frames are not the most mind-blowing things in there. Aside from the frames and photographs, there was also photography equipment in the attic that seems to have been used during the 1800s to 1900s. Yes, they're vintage treasures, but David and his friend knew that there's more to the studio than that. Once they found a certain piece of photograph, that's when they knew that they are in the midst of something historical. In the midst of finding things up, David came across several huge pieces of broken glass on the ground. He picked one up and placed his flashlight behind it, at which point he came to an abrupt halt. He was completely taken aback by what he had seen. Looking at the scattered pieces, he was fully certain that it was extremely valuable. He knew that they found something that almost led to the story of the attic room. The two men came upon a glass negative partial portrait of Susan B. Anthony. It was shot by photographer James Hale back in 1905, just a year before she died. There were also more things that they uncovered. They also discovered letters and other papers with Hale's name on them. There were fragments of the original glass plate negative that was used to print the photograph there too. Some of them had been damaged at some point throughout the years. They were so amazed at what they found that they decided to contact the Geneva Historical Society. Susan, the woman in the portrait, is known for her long and arduous struggle for women's rights, including the right to vote. Susan Anthony was detained in 1872 for exercising that right. It was soon explained to David and his friend that Hale displayed a collection of his photographs of suffragist leaders. During the 1907 New York State Women's Suffrage Association convention, these photographs were the prized stars of that moment. Hale had ties to the women's rights movement, which he proudly supported. He donated the copyright of the photographs to Susan B. Anthony Memorial Association, which used the image as her official portrait. They sold reproductions and postcards of these images to generate cash for the organization. There is even a clipping with the photo in it in the Library of Congress's collection. They haven't yet discovered the section of the negative that contains her head. But then, one part of the negative depicts the flag pin she used on her left side in the portrait. David is still hopeful that the remainder of the negative will be discovered. Sadly, he is concerned that it may have been lost forever. The majority of the subjects in the photographs are unidentified, but the researchers believe they have discovered images of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Elizabeth Smith Miller. Both of them were pioneers in the women's rights movement. Among the other things they discovered were photographs of sports teams, individuals in army fatigues, and an enormous burlap sack packed with hundreds of photographs that had been discarded. David knew that he had to do something about them. David wished for the negatives that they had discovered to be reproduced and preserved in some way. He made an effort to do this. Fortunately, he was able to locate a photographer in Geneva. They will attempt to develop prints from a large number of the glass negatives that were discovered. Still, David would like to know more about the photographer. The photographer, according to Weinstock, went to Geneva in 1892 and remained there until 1920, when he sold his photographic company to another camera operator. Weinstock was aware that Hale had a workspace on the second story of the building David bought. However, he was unaware of Hale's works in the attic. They decide to trace the previous owners to know how the vintage treasures ended up there. They were in for a mysterious ride to the past as the previous owners seemed to be oblivious about the whole thing. The guy from whom David purchased the building was also unaware of the hidden treasures above. Even the building's previous owners, who had purchased it in the 1960s, were taken aback by the revelation as well. Well, a little mystery is an exciting right. The third floor was converted into an apartment at some time, and a drop ceiling was constructed to conceal the unfinished area. The flat hasn't been rented in years. The lawyers who work in the offices on the first and second floors have used it as a storage space for their paperwork. Boy, if only they knew that they were standing on historic ground. According to David, they have no idea how or why the equipment and photos came up in that location, or why it was just left there and locked up. The answer to that question is likely to remain a secret for all time, but a little intrigue is always welcome, right? In order to grow his legal practice, he purchased the building and has stated that he intends to keep the attic open when he ultimately renovates the flat. It is still a mystery left unsolved. David is collaborating with a local auction business to clear out the attic and begin the massive task of cataloging everything. One source auctions owner Aaron Kervin described the day Whitcomb walked into his business. Aaron said that David was all thrilled, like a child in a sweet shop. He himself couldn't believe the bulk of historic photographs discovered. He thought of David fondly like a mini treasure hunter. Kervin explained that he handled the attic as if it were a crime scene because many of the things seemed to be rubbish to the untrained eye. In addition to the photographs, there were backgrounds, props, and even the furniture that had been used in some of the images on display during the exhibition. It's just like stepping back on Hale's studio from 100 years ago. Don't you wonder how much the collection is? Kervin admits that he has no clue how much the collection is worth. After all, it is so one of a kind. He believes, though, that there will be significant demand. If they can get it cleaned up and the pandemic is contained enough to draw a large crowd, he believes they will be able to have an auction in the middle of the year. Imagine how much money they can make. In an interview with CNN, Deborah L. Hughes, CEO of the National Susan B. Anthony Museum and House, revealed that she had a print of the Hale photograph on display in her office. The museum receives hundreds of calls each year from individuals who have received letters from Anthony. She says the correspondence, diaries, and other records preserved by women of the time continue to teach them more about the suffragist movement. Her story alone makes the entire collection worth bidding on. Hughes was overjoyed when David called to tell her about his discovery and stated it was an incredible story. When I think about this negative and the shattered glass, it reminds me a little bit of some of the glass ceilings that Susan B. Anthony put in place for us to continue to break, she explained. It's such an amazing discovery as to how it connects to the past, the present, and even to the future. Their work still holds importance in today's generation. Having completed the inventory, it is now time to locate a new home for these treasures. On September 18 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a live auction of all of the materials including Susan B. Anthony's portrait will take place in New York. Alternatively, all goods are also available to see on Invaluable, where bids are now being made. Better make your bids because these might be available anymore. Having the collection available online will allow everyone access, as well as allowing the materials to find a place within the genre that the customers like. There are many different categories in this collection, including photography, photographic history, women's history, and the suffrage movement. It's for everyone who wants to learn about their lives as well as the history involved in it. People will be racing to experience these magnificent photographs. Who could have thought that an investment in an old building will bring in 100 folds? David Whitcomb is one lucky man. He has uncovered historical things that are meant to be in the limelight. Would you be part of the bidding for this amazing vintage collection, or maybe a curious learner who is just in for the knowledge?